on the phone with us right now, we do have Damon DeMarco, the author of Tower Stories, An Oral History of 9/11, and also Reverend Jim Martin, who set up a ministry at the foot of the towers and kept it going for several weeks. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us here today on 9/11.
Well, thanks for having us.
Pleasure.
Absolutely. Now, Damon, we've talked to a couple of people. We talked to a former NYPD detective from last week, and then today we talked to a former NYPD officer who worked here in the Myrtle Beach area in the time since 9/11. And between the two of them and also our own Ruthie here, whenever you ask about their own history of what went on that day, a lot of people get very choked up and are kind of reluctant to tell the story. Damon, as you were writing this book, did you find it was hard to get people to kind of open up and tell about their experiences on that day?
Actually, no, because I wrote this book in the 18 months following 9/11. And so the paramedics and the firemen and the policemen and the rescue workers and the volunteers and the survivors and all the people that I talked to really had a very profound need to talk about what had happened. Everything that had happened was incredibly fresh in their minds and in their spirits. And I came along and I had my own project, this book project. And I was very gratified to just be able to sit there and listen to them. And it seemed to serve a purpose. Do you see what I'm saying? They really wanted to talk about what had happened, to let it be known what had happened to them.
Reverend, when we hear the term never forget, obviously that's become part of our lexicon when we hear and talk and remember at 9/11, never forgetting. Why is it so important in our psyche that we utilize flashbacks and memory to never forget things that go on in our lives, good, bad, tragic, indifferent?
Well, that's a good question. I think human nature is to kind of, forget, move on, especially if it's something painful. But I think, I can only speak about that from a believer's point of view. I think that, if we're struggling and we can look back and see times when we feel God has helped us through difficult situations, it makes it easier to look forward, right? So I often tell people that when you look backwards and see God's hand in your life, and whatever your belief system is, it helps you to see God present and also God kind of moving ahead. So I think it strengthens us to look back and to see the kinds of things that we were able to surmount so that we can face the challenges of today and tomorrow.
Damon, do you think the spirit of America is still with us in the same way that it was immediately after 9/11? I spoke about the volunteerism from obviously New Yorkers, but from the whole nation, from the whole world wanted to help. Do you think America still has that spirit?
Yes, unequivocally, yes. It's more challenged than ever, but yes, it's still part of us. And it's not about being an American in my mind. It's about being a human being. What happens is, as I've seen, and I bet that you've seen the same thing, that when really, really challenging things happen, suddenly we drop all of our divisions. It doesn't matter anymore what your politics are, what your religion is, your ethnicity, sexual orientation, how much money you have in your bank account, what your shoe size is. None of that matters, because we remember that we're all just human beings on this rock, and we see in each other in these great challenging moments, oh, I'm just like you. I've got kids too. I've got people that I love too. I want to go home too. And so suddenly service to one another becomes service to ourselves. Now, yes, we're living in challenging times. Everybody knows that. And sometimes it takes a real swift kick in the pants to get us to remember this. But the bottom line is that we don't need the tragedy to act a certain way. We just need to remember that we have the power of choice. We can turn something bad into good at any moment. We can connect rather than separate. We can be thankful rather than casting blame. We can contribute something rather than take something. That's all in our power right now. And I reflect on that every morning as I'm drinking my first cup of coffee. And by the second cup of coffee, I generally remember it, generally.
Damon DeMarco is the author of Tower Stories, An Oral History of 9/11. We'll put all this information up on our Facebook page. We also have Reverend Jim Martin, who set up a ministry at the foot of the towers after the towers came down after 9/11. And Reverend Martin, obviously, when something like this, a catastrophe happens, people go one direction or another as far as religion is concerned. They'll either say, how can a God do something like this, allow something like this to happen? But the other camp would be, they'll all kind of huddle together and look for strength in numbers. So were you kind of surprised at how things went as you set up your ministry down there at Ground Zero?
Well, I was pretty surprised because it was such an overwhelming experience of seeing so many people come together. Now, remember, as you know, it's not just, as you were saying earlier, not just about the victims, but the people who sacrificed their lives. So this was a place of great service and of great sacrifice as well, the firefighters, the rescue workers. But then you had people, at the time who were coming in, the firefighters, rescue workers, doctors, nurses, people like that. It was really, hundreds and probably thousands of people down there. And then you had people from kind of all walks of life. I remember running into a woman who had a candy stand, believe it or not. She had this little candy stand just giving out free candy. And she was from Ohio. She had driven from Ohio. So it is about these choices, as Damon was saying. People make choices to, kind of withdraw or to kind of go out of themselves and, really choose new life and service.
This is a moment where I want to talk about Father Martin's new book. It's called Come Forth, The Promise of Jesus' Greatest Miracle. And it's about the story of Lazarus. Now, you don't have to be a Christian to appreciate the story of Lazarus, because as Father Martin writes very eloquently, Jesus in Christianity, in the Christian story, calls Lazarus to be resurrected, right? He says, come out of that tomb. Come out into the daylight, right? But it's Lazarus who has to make the choice. Do I go out into the light or do I stay in the darkness? And I think this is what we've been talking about. Every single moment we can remember that we are in a state of choice. And if we remember that, if we tune into that, the sky is the limit about what we can accomplish, not just in our personal lives, but in our societal lives as well. So I think this is a dynamite book. It doesn't matter your religious persuasion. It's the morality, it's the values that's in it that I think everybody can profit from.
And gentlemen, I know we only have you for a couple more minutes, but we do want to see if we can take a minute of silence here, moment of silence, because right now is the exact time at 8:46 that the first plane crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. So if you'll join us all in commemorating our moment of silence here on Hot Talk 99.5. All right. Thank you very much, Joe.
Damon, we talk about the recollection, obviously, that you had documented, and in terms of just history, being a journalist, an author, a photographer, the role in the midst of things might not, be front and center because you're dutied with documenting it as a job. But in the aftermath of that sort of stuff, does it kind of hit you that you were a part of, obviously something a little bit bigger than yourself and the role and the responsibility that you undertook as an author in this case?
Joe, I was lucky because I got to choose how I served. I was not at ground zero. Do you understand? And so I gave myself a job because I was hurt and I was wounded and I was scared. My nation and my city had just been attacked. I just lost people. That was hard. It was hard it was still sinking in. I needed to do something constructive with my time or I would have just lost it completely. And so that's where this whole book project came from. And over the 18 months that it took me to interview all these people, over 100 people, not all of them are in the book, but paramedics and policemen and firemen and rescue recovery workers and volunteers and survivors, the one thing that kept coming through to me is that they were always focused on somebody else. Every single one of them. They were there to serve other people. And that's how we shined. And that's how we always shine as human beings. When we put our attention on other people and we say, how can I help you? We help ourselves.
Reverend, I'm going to ask you a very difficult question. We talk on this day of the victims, of those who came to help, those who lost their lives running in as opposed to away. And many people of many faiths lost their faith barrier to come together. The people that committed these attacks also had faith. They believed that they were doing something faith-based to them. How do you reconcile that with what you saw right in front of you?
Well, I think, faith can make people, unfortunately, do terrible things and, tragic things. And, part of it is having also a mind to try to say, what does it seem like God wants me to do? And I don't think, obviously, killing people is what God wants it to do, certainly from a Christian point of view. Now, I'm not saying anything about Islam, but these individuals, chose to use their faith, or I would say abuse their faith. I think an important thing to say is that, this was condemned by Muslim leaders around the world. So it was a kind of perversion of their faith. Look, I think that God gives us choices in our lives, and we can, in the Old Testament, it says choose life. We're always supposed to choose life in all these situations. So that's a real fundamental about faith. But, again, faith can be perverted. Faith can be used as an excuse, to carry out violence, which I think is, which is completely against God's desires.
And gentlemen, I know we have to let you go, and it's going to be a long day for you because you got a lot of people to talk to just like us about a very tough subject. So thanks very much. Damon DeMarco, the author of Tower Stories, An Oral History of 9/11, and Father Jim Martin, who has a new book coming out called Come Forth. So look for that as well. So, gentlemen, thanks again for your time today, and have a good day if possible.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.